I moved into the neighborhood 3 weeks ago. Quiet cul-de-sac, decent yard, and a garage big enough for my '64 Mustang project. I figured it'd be the perfect place to settle down after 20 years in law enforcement. What I didn't expect. A hostile welcome committee in the form of Charlene Whitmore, president of the Oakview Ridge Homeowners Association. Charlene was in her late 50s, platinum perm like a helmet, and a permanent scowl like she was sniffing sour milk. She strutted around the neighborhood in her orthopedic sandals like she owned every blade of grass. The woman had a clipboard at all times and eyes like a hawk with a grudge. She approached me on day 2 while I was unloading boxes. "You're not allowed to park your truck on the street overnight," she stated flatly, zero introduction. "It's against HOA Code 4.3b. I glanced at the dusty Ford parked neatly at the curb. "It won't be there overnight, I'm just unloading." She narrowed her eyes. "We take rules seriously here, mister." "Grayson Lockwood," I replied, setting the box down. "And I take intimidation pretty seriously, Charlene." She didn't like that. Her lips thinned into a tight line and she stormed off muttering something about fines. I shrugged and went back to work. I thought that'd be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, I got warnings for unauthorized exterior paint. It's beige. Excessive garage noise. I was using a wrench. And failure to mow the lawn within HOA schedule. It rained for 3 days. I ignored the petty notes she kept taping to my door and just focused on settling in. But this morning, things escalated to a whole new level. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when 2 police cruisers rolled up in front of my house. Lights flashing, doors slamming. Both officers approached like I was holding hostages. "Mr. Lockwood?" one of them asked. "Yeah," I said, standing slowly. "What's going on?" "We received a call about a trespasser refusing to vacate private property. Caller claims you're not the legal owner of this house." I blinked. "What?" Right on cue, Charlene came marching up the sidewalk in her usual pastel cardigan and pearls, waving her HOA binder like it was the Constitution. "I want him out," she barked. "He falsified documents to move in. This house was meant to be reviewed by the HOA board before sale." "He never got approval." The younger officer looked confused. "Ma'am, property sales go through the county, not the HOA. He's squatting," Charlene shrieked. "He broke in. I demand he be removed immediately." I pulled out my wallet slowly and handed the officer my ID. "Detective Sergeant Grayson Lockwood, retired. Here's my badge, and here's the key to the front door, deed, and closing documents." Charlene's face twisted. "That badge isn't real." "Oh, it's real," I said, nodding toward the documents in the officer's hand. "And so is that paperwork. You just called in a false report to 911, accused a homeowner of squatting, and tried to evict someone with no legal authority." The same officer turned to her. "Ma'am, did you know he owned the home?" she huffed. "That's not the point. He didn't get HOA clearance." "That's fraud." "That's not how fraud works," I said. "But filing a false police report, that's a misdemeanor, and trying to impersonate a legal authority to evict someone, that's criminal impersonation." The older officer looked at his partner. They nodded. "Charlene Whitmore, you are under arrest for filing a false police report and criminal misrepresentation of authority." Her mouth opened and closed like a goldfish as they read her rights and cuffed her right there on the sidewalk. Neighbors peeked through blinds. A few came out and watched in stunned silence. I just sipped my coffee, and you know what? It finally tasted perfect. Charlene's arrest sent a ripple through Oakview Ridge. The next morning, I caught a glimpse of the neighborhood group chat on the screen of my neighbor's phone while we both waited at the mailbox. The thread was chaos, some people defending her. Others shocked she'd gone that far, and a few, surprisingly, relieved someone had finally stood up to her. I didn't chime in. I had a feeling things were about to get a lot messier. By Thursday, a manila envelope showed up in my mailbox, no stamp, just hand-delivered. Inside was a formal notice of HOA investigation into my non-compliance with Community Integration Protocol. No signature, no letterhead, Just a weird list of buzzwords that sounded like someone copy-pasted legal terms off a blog. I walked it over to the county clerk's office that afternoon. While waiting, I struck up a conversation with the records officer, a sharp woman named Denise, who clearly didn't suffer fools. After I showed her the envelope and explained where it came from, she gave me a look like I'd handed her a crayon drawing pretending to be a contract. "None of this has legal standing," Denise said, flipping the page over. "There's no such thing as community integration protocol. That's not even a real term under HOA governance statutes." "Thought so," I replied. "Mind if I get a copy of all documents Oakview Ridge has filed with the county in the last 6 months?" Denise raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of paper. I've got time." 2 hours later, I had a stack 2 inches thick and a thumb drive with digital scans. What I found was worse than I expected. Charlene hadn't just been overstepping, she and a few board members had quietly filed amendments to the HOA bylaws without informing homeowners. They'd also submitted a request to the zoning board to redraw green space boundaries to include 3 privately owned lots, mine being one of them. That explained her obsession with driving me out. If I left and the house went back on the market, she could argue it was part of the community easement expansion and push it into HOA control. It was a long con, and I had walked right into the middle of it. I drove straight to the zoning office and met with a man named Arthur, a city planner who looked like he hadn't taken a vacation since the Clinton administration. I laid out the documents. He read through them slowly, then took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "These requests were approved on the assumption they were submitted with full homeowner consensus," he said. "If they weren't, that's zoning fraud." "How do we prove that?" I asked. Arthur nodded toward the digital files. "If you've got homeowner signatures for the amendments, compare them to the ones on file for the zoning request. If they don't match, you've got forgery." That night, I went through every page cross-checking signatures. It didn't take long. 5 of the names on the zoning submission didn't match the ones on the HOA amendment petition. And 2 were from residents who had moved out 9 months ago. I called a friend at the district attorney's office the next morning. He'd been my partner back when I worked fraud cases, and I knew he'd take this seriously. I gave him everything: documents, digital files, timeline, and a list of affected homeowners. By the end of the day, he'd opened a preliminary investigation. I didn't tell anyone in the neighborhood. I wanted to see how deep the rot went. The next HOA board meeting was held in the clubhouse on Sunday afternoon. Charlene, out on bail, showed up late in oversized sunglasses and a scarf like she was dodging paparazzi. Her usual air of superiority had shifted into something more desperate. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. When she opened the meeting, she announced a temporary leadership restructure and handed the floor to a man named Elliot, vice president, mid-60s, gray pinstripe suit like he was headed to a courtroom. He didn't smile. "As acting board chair, I'd like to remind everyone that disruptive behavior will not be tolerated," Elliot began. "We've had some unfortunate misunderstandings with new residents. Going forward, we will be implementing stricter oversight to ensure compliance." I raised my hand. Elliot ignored me. "I said," he repeated louder, "disruptions will not be tolerated. That includes unapproved commentary." I stood up anyway. "So you're not taking questions? This isn't a courtroom, Mr. Lockwood." "Good thing I already found one." That earned a few murmurs from the crowd. I stepped forward and placed a folder on the table in front of the board. "This contains evidence of forged signatures submitted to the zoning board under Charlene's leadership," I said clearly. "It also includes unauthorized bylaw amendments and zoning map alterations designed to illegally annex private lots." Charlene half rose from her chair. "He's lying. He's twisting everything." "Then you won't mind if I hand these over to the district attorney," I said, not looking at her. Elliot tried to reach for the folder, but I stopped him. "You can view it when the DA's office finishes their review. For now, I suggest you take a very close look at your legal exposure." Because unless every member of this board can prove you weren't in on it, you're all under scrutiny." The room erupted. Several homeowners stood demanding answers. One woman at the back started filming. A younger couple began flipping through their own HOA paperwork, whispering urgently. Elliot tried to gavel things down, but no one was listening anymore. Charlene, suddenly pale, pushed back from the table and made for the door. I intercepted her halfway. "You're not leaving just yet," I said quietly. "I'm not answering anything without my lawyer," she snapped, voice trembling. "Good," I replied. "You'll need one." By Wednesday, subpoenas had gone out. The DA's office confirmed that at least 3 board members were under investigation for document falsification, attempted property theft, and zoning fraud. Charlene's fingerprints were on every forged page. Her bail was revoked, and she was taken into custody again, this time without the fanfare. No one came out to watch. The HOA board dissolved itself 2 days later. A temporary oversight panel was appointed by the city until a new election could be held. Most of the residents seemed relieved. A few still clung to the idea that Charlene had meant well, but even they couldn't deny what the evidence showed. I didn't run for the new board. I didn't need to. I'd done what I came to do, and besides, my Mustang was finally ready to roll out of the garage. I had better things to focus on. But every now and then, when I walk past the clubhouse and see the new sign, Oakview Ridge Neighborhood Council, member elected, resident powered, I allow myself a small nod. Justice, after all, isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about knowing where the paper trail ends. The week following the board's collapse was quiet, but it wasn't peace, it was a silence waiting to be broken. I spent my mornings in the garage again, but I kept one ear tuned to the neighborhood. Something wasn't sitting right. Charlene wasn't the type to go down without dragging someone with her, and I had a hunch we hadn't seen the last of whatever mess she'd left behind. Late Friday afternoon, I got a call from the county assessor's office. "Mr. Lockwood, this is Janet Billings. We're reviewing a batch of tax reassessments filed by the Oakview Ridge HOA last quarter. Your name came up." I leaned against the workbench. "Let me guess, something doesn't add up." "There's a lien recorded against your property," she said, flipping through files audibly. "It was filed under a community maintenance bond, supposedly signed by you." "I never signed any bond," I said flatly. "That's what we figured. The signature doesn't match your deed or your purchase documents. And the same lien is showing up on 6 other properties in your cul-de-sac." I thanked her and hung up, then pulled up the scanned documents from the HOA records I'd copied earlier. Sure enough, buried in a subfolder marked Community Capital Improvements Q2 were several forged bond agreements. They were vague, intentionally so, just enough language to sound official, but not enough to hold legal weight if challenged. The signatures were all different, but none of them matched the actual homeowners. I printed everything and drove straight to the sheriff's department. Detective Laura Chen met me in interview room B. She'd worked economic crimes for over a decade and didn't blink at the stack of documents I handed her. She paged through them slowly, her expression tightening with each turn. "These are forged," she said. "And whoever filed them did so through third-party notaries who don't exist. That's felony fraud, probably wire fraud too if any of this went through interstate systems." "There's more," I said. "If you cross-reference the bond numbers with the county budget requests, you'll find matching entries in the community grant applications Charlene filed. That's public funds redirected based on fraudulent collateral." She paused. "You're saying Oakview Ridge HOA used fake homeowner bonds to secure county development funds?" "Looks that way." Laura sat back, rubbing her jaw. "This is bigger than zoning fraud. If they received money based on this paperwork, we're looking at embezzlement. And if any of that money got funneled into personal accounts." I nodded. "There's your motive." By Monday, the sheriff's department, along with investigators from the state attorney general's office, raided the HOA's storage unit and seized 2 desktop computers from the former treasurer's home. They found digital records of payment transfers, along with spreadsheets detailing how the money was divided, a third to consulting fees, a third to legal retainer, and a final third simply labeled community enrichment. That last category was the widest a catch-all that included things like board luncheons, travel stipends, and one especially bold entry, Landscape Morale Fund, the total misappropriated funds. Just north of $200,000 on Tuesday morning, I saw moving trucks outside Elliot's house. Not the usual kind, either. These had county seals on the doors and officers in plain clothes overseeing the process. Elliot stood on his porch, arms folded, jaw locked. One of the agents handed him a search warrant and he didn't even argue. Just turned, walked back inside and sat down on the couch while they boxed up hard drives and file folders. That afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was Officer Ramirez, one of the two who'd responded when Charlene first tried to have me removed. "She's trying to make a deal," he said, eyes scanning the street behind him. "Charlene. She's offering full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence." Names, dates, the whole operation. "She's turning on the board?" I asked. Ramirez shook his head. "She's turning on everyone, including a couple people at the county grant office who helped push through approvals without oversight." I let out a low whistle. That explains how they got so far without getting flagged. She also claims there was a plan to push out certain homeowners people who didn't comply or who questioned the board. They targeted properties with older deeds, ones that didn't include updated HOA clauses. Yours was on that list. I felt my jaw tighten. They wanted to force a sale so they could gain control of the lot. Exactly. The fake fines, the harassment, even the 911 call, it was all part of a pressure campaign. They picked the wrong guy. He gave a single nod. "That's why we're here." By Thursday, the charges were officially filed. Charlene was indicted on 9 felony counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of public funds. Elliot was hit with 7 counts, including falsifying public documents and aiding in financial misrepresentation. The treasurer, a quiet woman named Lenora I'd barely seen outside her garden, was charged with embezzlement and destruction of records after she allegedly tried to shred receipts when the raid began. A special hearing was held at the county courthouse to determine the HOA's future. I attended, along with 24 other residents. The judge, a stoic woman in her 60s with a reputation for zero tolerance toward corruption, read through the charges before making her ruling. The Oakview Ridge Homeowners Association is hereby dissolved as a legal entity. Any remaining funds are to be returned to the homeowners or redirected to county maintenance services. The properties previously under its jurisdiction will revert to standard municipal governance. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the street. Microphones were shoved in every direction, but I didn't say a word. I wasn't interested in interviews. Let the story tell itself. Back at Oakview Ridge, things shifted almost overnight. The mailbox cluster was repaired by the city. Lawn inspections stopped entirely. People started talking to each other again, really talking, not the tight-lipped nods we'd gotten used to. Someone even organized a block cookout. I didn't plan it, I just showed up with a cooler and a grill. Midway through the evening, a man I hadn't met before approached me. Mid-40s, worn cargo hat, calloused hands. "I'm Mason," he said. "Bricklayer, Lot 7, heard you're the one who cracked it all open." "I just followed the paper trail," I replied. He shook his head. "Nah, you did more than that. You reminded people they can fight back." I didn't have an answer to that, so I just nodded. That night, I sat on my porch and listened to the sounds of actual laughter echoing down the block. No more clipboard inspections, no more fake notices, just neighbors reclaiming their street. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't come with sirens or speeches. Sometimes it came with a folder, a badge, and a little patience. And in the end, it left behind something better than revenge. It gave people their voice back. 2 weeks after the judge dissolved the HOA, Oakview Ridge resembled a neighborhood waking from a long, uneasy sleep. Lawns were a little overgrown, sure, and the community bulletin board sat empty for the first time in years, but no one missed the violation notices or the constant surveillance under the guise of compliance checks. Kids played in driveways again. Garage doors stayed open longer. You could hear music on weekends. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something hadn't settled. Charlene's cooperation with the investigation had fast-tracked a few indictments, but it also came with a cost. She'd been granted limited immunity in exchange for a full accounting of the financial scheme. That meant she walked for now. I understood the DA's strategy: take down the deeper rot, but it left a bad taste, especially when I learned what she was doing next. I was at the hardware store picking up a new torque wrench when I ran into Denise from the clerk's office. She glanced around before leaning in close. "She's petitioning for a new HOA charter," she said. "Not here, the development next to yours, Briar Hollow." I blinked. "That's a brand new subdivision. They haven't even finished paving the back lots." "She's already filed a proposal to serve as interim liaison for the homeowners committee. Wants to establish early governance protocols. Probably figured people won't question her if she's the one handing out welcome baskets." "Does the proposal mention her criminal history?" Denise gave a dry laugh. "Conveniently omitted." Back at home, I pulled up the public filings for Briar Hollow. Sure enough, there it was. Proposal for Community Oversight Structure, signed by Charlene Whitmore, submitted under the name of a nonprofit she'd registered 3 years earlier, Oakview Civic Foundation. It was a shell organization. No board members listed, no financial disclosures. Just a P.O. box and a mission statement full of vague phrases like community cohesion and value preservation. That night, I printed everything: filings, property maps, a copy of her immunity agreement, and drove to the county administrative building. I wasn't going to let her crawl into another neighborhood and restart her empire under a new name. I met with Assistant County Counsel, a man named Reuben Klein. He had a habit of tapping his knuckles together when he was thinking, and by the time he'd finished scanning the documents, his hands were a blur. "She's exploiting a loophole," he muttered. "Because her nonprofit technically predates the development, she's claiming historical alignment. That gives her standing to file oversight requests during the zoning phase. She's repackaging the same scam under a different name," I said, "and she's banking on no one checking her background." Reuben tapped once more, then stood. "I'll file an injunction request with the zoning board. But we'll need a public hearing to challenge the petition formally." "I'll be there," I said, "and I won't be alone." The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. By then, word had spread, not just among Oakview Ridge residents but to Briar Hollow too. Flyers circulated. Someone created a website with scanned copies of the forged documents from the HOA fiasco. A few of the future Briar Hollow homeowners showed up early, wide-eyed and clearly rattled. Charlene arrived 20 minutes late, flanked by a man in a blazer who looked like he charged hourly. When the board called her name, she stepped up to the podium like nothing had happened. The same rigid posture, the same patronizing tone. "I'm here to offer continuity," she said. "New communities need structure. Without it, you'll see property values decline, amenities misused, and long-term growth undermined. I've led a neighborhood before. I know how to keep things orderly." She didn't mention Oakview Ridge once. When it was my turn, I didn't bring drama, just facts. I laid out her criminal charges, the immunity deal, the fraudulent liens, the fake bond agreements. I handed the board copies of the DA's findings and highlighted the clause in her immunity contract that specifically barred her from engaging in financial oversight of any residential community during the investigation's duration. Charlene's attorney objected. Claimed it was irrelevant. The board chairman, a retired judge named Harris Feldman, raised an eyebrow. "You're telling us a woman who helped falsify property documents, misused public funds, and attempted to annex private lots under false pretense is a suitable candidate for community leadership." She has not been convicted, the attorney replied. She avoided conviction by turning on her co-conspirators, I said. And now she wants to try again under a different name with fewer eyes on her. The room stayed quiet. Then a young couple from Briar Hollow stood up. She sent us a welcome letter, the woman said. Said we'd be expected to follow community standards once the board was formalized. Told us not to install garden beds until we had approval. She doesn't even live there. That did it. The board ruled unanimously to deny her petition. They also referred her nonprofit to the state for failure to disclose financial relationships tied to a criminal investigation. As the room emptied, Charlene didn't even look at me. She just walked out, tight-lipped, her attorney muttering as they disappeared down the hallway. I thought that would be the end of it, but 2 days later I got a call from Laura Chen. We got a tip, she said. Anonymous, but they claimed Charlene backdated a second set of bond agreements from her time at Oakview Ridge, ones that weren't disclosed during the initial investigation. If that's true, she violated her immunity agreement. What's the source? Someone on the inside, probably a former board member covering themselves. 3 hours later, a warrant was executed at the P.O. box listed on her nonprofit. Inside, investigators found a locked filing cabinet tucked behind furniture in the storage office. The key was on Charlene's keyring during her last arrest. Inside were over 100 documents, including a second ledger hidden from the audit. It showed money moved through a different account, one linked to her daughter's marketing firm. The payments were labeled as consulting fees. Charlene was taken into custody that evening, this time without a lawyer buffer. Her immunity was revoked. She was arraigned the next morning on new charges: perjury, obstruction of justice, and continued wire fraud. No bail. I watched the coverage from home. No celebration, no vindication, just a quiet nod to the end of a long, exhausting mess. Later that week, the city sent out a notice confirming Oakview Ridge would now be integrated into the county's standard residential services. Trash collection, road maintenance, and code enforcement all handled by municipal departments. No more private oversight. No more hidden bylaws. The new neighborhood committee was small, informal, and voluntary. I was asked to join. I declined. They still call me when something looks off: abandoned vehicles, strange surveyors taking measurements at odd hours, but I keep my role advisory now. The Mustang's finally running again. I spend more time rebuilding engines than sorting through legal briefs. Charlene hasn't resurfaced. Her trial is set for the fall, and with the new evidence, the DA's confident she'll serve time. The other board members took plea deals. Most moved. One stayed. Oddly enough, Mason told me he saw her repotting azaleas last week, sunglasses on, head down. People remember, but they move on. That's the thing about neighborhoods. They recover in layers. First you get rid of the rot, then you rebuild slowly, brick by brick. And if someone tries to sneak back in under a new name, well, some of us still keep detailed files.